owning the content you create is important, right? Welcome to the official podcast for National Podcast Post Month. My name is Jennifer Navarrete, and I'm the founder of NaPodPoMo, and this podcast is your guide to navigate through the 30-day Global Podcast Challenge. In the first part of this podcast, I shared some podcasting basics. Now we're going to jump into the deep end of the pool and go all in on content ownership. From the concept of ownership and why ownership matters to the practical application of ownership and why you should totally own your podcast, and well, about as much as your online content as possible. You'll be hearing more from Todd Cochran, Stephanie Fuccio, and Sam Sethi as they share their own insights into ownership, why it matters, and what you can do to leverage the power of social media platforms, but maintain as much ownership on that content as possible in future episodes. So let's begin. First, let's set the foundation for what ownership is. According to dictionary.com, ownership is the legal right of possession or proprietorship. And according to Wikipedia, ownership is the state or fact of legal possession and control over property, which may be any asset, tangible or intangible. Okay, so we now have an understanding of ownership from a definition standpoint. Let's apply that to our body of work as podcasters. If you have a domain and website hosting you pay for, or are on a decentralized social media-based blockchain, then the content you create in those places is yours. You own it. If you're creating content on traditional social media platforms like Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, Threads, LinkedIn, etc., you do not own it. You have zero control over it. It can be taken away without you having any recourse, and many times with no real explanation. It is rented land. So if your entire online presence is on rented land, then you own nothing and ultimately have no control over the content you create there. Pretty harsh, right? But it's true. Now, I'm not saying we should not leverage the power of traditional social media platforms. Absolutely. The world gathers in those places. But I am saying our entire online existence should have a home that we own and have control of. Another way to look at your content creation strategy is through the lens of the PESO model, created by Gini Dietrich. PESO stands for paid, earned, shared, owned. When creating content, when marketing, when coming up with your strategy, this is a model that I think does a good job of detailing what paid, earned, shared, and owned content and platforms are, as well as being a solid framework for us as podcasters and content creators to model. Like most things, find what makes sense and works for you and leave the rest behind. So what does that mean for you? Well, let's focus on the S and the O part of the PESO model. Start by examining where your content lives, where you spend most of your time, and give yourself an assessment. I would venture to say that most of us, and yeah, I'm totally including myself in this, spend most of our time on the S in PESO. We share content on social media platforms, but we don't just share. We also create original content that only lives on those shared platforms, meaning that if we go askew of a social media platform's algorithm or their ever-changing terms of service, or what's acceptable now maybe isn't acceptable in the future, you may find yourself silenced, which is something we've seen quite a bit in recent years. If that happens to you and your content because it's only ever existed on the one social media platform, it could be gone forever. It will almost be as though it never existed. Sure, you can go back to the Wayback Machine and possibly find your content there, but the content, reaction, engagement, comments, and community you built over the years would be gone. It's a painful reality. So given that most of us are over-leveraged on the shared side of things, how much of our content begins and lives on our owned platforms? Once you do an audit of your content creation habits, it's time to begin putting action into a more balanced model between owned and shared. Think of this as an investment into yourself and your body of work. And let me tell you, you're worth it. When it comes to your podcast, NaPodPoMo 2024 sponsor Blubrry takes your content ownership seriously. To learn more, visit blubrry.com. Connect with your fellow NaPodPoMo community on platforms like Facebook, X, and Hive. Links for everything is in the show notes.